Well, C.S. Lewis, Seduced by a Jezebel. After all the guy's writing, especially in his book called An Allegory of Love, after all his writing about romantic love and how it corrupts biblical marriage and the courtly love passed down from the 11th century with knights and maidens and white knighting and all that stuff, all the things that he wrote, all this awesome stuff, in the end, I'll bet you didn't know, C.S. Lewis was seduced by a Jezebel. Let me get into it. Pastor Dalrock wrote an article about this, and I'll put a link in the show notes to his article. And if you're liking this content, like, subscribe, give me a comment. But in the article, he writes that Lewis, despite his genius, seems to have internalized the pedestalization in his otherwise insightful study of courtly love in his book, An Allegory of Love. Lewis married a divorced single mother of two named Joy Davidman, and the marriage started for the purposes of securing a visa, at least in Lewis's mind, it did. Pastor Dalrock, he writes, at the start of the whole affair, some of C.S. Lewis's friends even were troubled by the impropriety of their relationship. Let me give you the details of that. It began with Joy Davidman leaving her family in a bid to seduce Lewis. Here's what he writes. With their marriage in trouble, Davidman and Gershom, which is Joy Davidman's first husband, they were having marriage trouble, so they together read Lewis's Christian apologetics and were converted. That's awesome. That's good stuff. They joined a Presbyterian church. Hey, that's awesome too. I love that, yeah. And she, Joy Davidman, began corresponding with C.S. Lewis. Even as oddly, she and her husband dabbled in Scientology. Now that's kind of off subject, but that is a little weird. Through their letters, Davidman fell in love with C.S. Lewis, although at first he did not seem to reciprocate. Still, in 1952, she set sail for England, leaving behind her husband and her two sons, and she made no secret about her intentions, which was to seduce C.S. Lewis. Whoa. Now, if anybody should have seen this coming, it was C.S. Lewis, right? This guy wrote a book on the dangers of romantic love, how it is antithetical to biblical marriage. Now, even this is interesting too. Pastor Dalrock writes, a Christianity Today post claims in Joy Davidman's defense that when she announced she was going to England to seduce Lewis, she was merely making a joke. And it wasn't a joke. Now, the reason the Christianity Today post in this article, it was a response to a book by Alistair McGrath written on C.S. Lewis called C.S. Lewis, A Life. So anyway, Joy Davidman was staying in C.S. Lewis's home when her husband finally wrote to her asking for a divorce. Here's what he writes. After several lunch meetings and walks accompanying Davidman and his brother, Warren Lewis wrote in his diary, this is C.S. Lewis' brother, that a rapid friendship had developed between his younger brother, C.S. Lewis, and Joy, whom he described as a Christian convert, medium height, good figure, horn-rimmed specs, quite extraordinarily uninhibited. She spent Christmas and a fortnight at the Kilns with the brother, and by this time was said to have fallen in love with C.S. Lewis. But he seemed to be oblivious to her feelings. He's not fazed by romantic love. So everything's okay, right? This says Joy returned home to the USA in January 1953, having received a letter from her husband Gershom that he and her cousin were having an affair and he wanted a divorce. This is while she is pursuing an affair with C.S. Lewis. In 1956, Joy Davidman's visitor's visa was not renewed by the Home Office, requiring that Davidman and her sons return to America. So now her and her sons are living in England. So C.S. Lewis agreed to enter into a civil marriage contract with her so that she could continue to live in the UK telling a friend that the marriage was a pure matter of friendship and expediency for his friend, Joy, and her 2 sons. Now, at this point, I think he was sincere that she was just a friend. The civil marriage took place at the registrar's office, blah, blah, blah. The couple continued to live separately after their civil marriage. Okay, so there's nothing going afoul here yet, other than Joy is infatuated with him. She's in love with him. She wants to really be married, not just have a civil marriage so they can stay in the country. Eventually, here's where things take a turn for the worse. Now, eventually, C.S. Lewis discovered that he felt romantic love for her. And they decided to marry again, this time for real. Meaning they were going to get married in the church. The relationship between Joy and C.S. Lewis had developed to the point that they sought a Christian marriage. This was not straightforward in the Church of England at that time because she was divorced. But a friend and Anglican priest, Reverend Peter Bide, performed the ceremony at Davidman's hospital bed. That's kind of odd. In 1957. The marriage did not win wide approval among Lewis's social circle, though, and some of his friends and colleagues avoided the new couple. As a New York Times article explained, part of the reasons Lewis's friends did not approve was that Joy Davidman, his now new wife, had a lack of a submissive spirit. Wow, shocker there. They said she was a homely American, disliked by Lewis's friends for her Hebraism and her pushiness. Very pushy woman. Which, yeah, seems like she probably would be if she boarded a ship and bound to seduce C.S. Lewis and succeeded in it eventually after she got a civil marriage so she could stay in the country, and then eventually a romantic marriage. So in the end, C.S. Lewis fell into what he warned so many wise men about, romantic or courtly love. He fell right into it. Even as Lewis warns in the Allegory of Love, his famous book, he talks about that. And I've done multiple videos on this. You can look back. Maybe I should put a link to them or whatever. You can look back there. I've done multiple videos on C.S. Lewis' wise words about this. Here's what he writes in his book. French poets in the 11th century discovered or invented or were the first to express the romantic species of passion. This is talking about romantic or courtly love, which English poets were still writing about in the 19th century. He says they effected a change which has left no corner of our ethics, our imagination, or our daily life untouched, and they erected impassable barriers between us and the classic past or the Oriental past. Compared with this revolution, meaning the romantic love replacing biblical marriage, that's the revolution he's talking about. So compared with this revolution, the Renaissance is a mere ripple on the surface of literature. Now that is quite a statement, and I believe he is 100% correct. So Pastor Dalrock then sums up his article with saying that this chasm is so great that nearly everyone today in the modern world and in the church, which is the worst part, believes that the morally twisted chivalric tradition of courtly love, romantic love, represents Christian values and teaching on marriage and sexual morality, meaning that romantic love is what sanctifies sex, not marriage sanctifying sex, which is what the Bible teaches. Boy, this is bad stuff. This is just like in Pirates of the Caribbean, you know, when Johnny Depp comes in, one of the opening scenes, and there's this sign, and it shows a pirate that's been hung, it's been hanging there a while, and it says, "Pirates, ye be warned." I say, "Men, ye be warned." C.S. Lewis, the guy who was writing the book about this, fell into the same thing. Well, you gotta hate it. You gotta hate it. But listen, even with that, Christ is still winning. He is building his church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Until next time, this is the Postmillennial Man.